Shalom to everyone. Tonight we're going to do chapters 66 and 67. The first chapter, 66, is called Inverse Numbers, Letters, or Words. This is where you'll have a gematria of a word and its inverse. And we'll see amazing things come out of it, or letters in a word, when reversed and spelled backwards, has also like a mirror image. This is like almost all of our methodologies mentioned long ago, most of it in the Gemara, the Midrash, Kabbalah. This particular method, as all the methods with the numbers, there's no doubt that Rav Ginsburg has taken a method that was used and he just expands it and shows where it is applicable and manifests itself all over the Chumash and the Tanakh. Okay, so we'll start with one that Rav Ginsburg actually revealed, is that at the burning bush, when Moshe asks, if I go back to Egypt, they're going to ask me, who sent me? What should I tell them? And God revealed a name that is only mentioned one time in the whole Tanakh. Ekia Asher Ekia. I will be that I will be. And this gematria is 543. 543. And Rav Ginsburg points out that when you inverse the numbers, and this is a method in mathematics, the idea of inverse numbers. So 543 is 345. That equals Moshe. Moshe equals 345. And this name of God is 543. So here we see what is mentioned in the Torah a number of times, where God and the Torah testify that God spoke to Moshe face to face, which is like a mirror image. And we see it in the numbers. I will be that I will be is the inverse of Moshe. And everyone points out that if you take the letters of Moshe, Mem, Shin, He, and you inverse them, He, Shin, Mem, it spells Hashem. So this is showing a relationship between God and Moshe through inverse numbers and inverse letters. The way that I learned this is the second book that I wrote, The Mystical Power of Music. So all of my books have the approbation of Rav Ginsburg. And he wrote in it that 543 also equals Koach Shira, the power of song. So there's a very, very deep meaning here, because the name of God, I will be that I will be, it also applies to every person. Every person wants to be who they can be. In other words, to fulfill or activate their full potential. So this idea of I will be that I will be, of course, it's a name of God. But since we are a Chelak Eloka Mima'al Mamash, an actual part of God above, so this name also applies to us. And the idea is, what helps us be who we can be? And that is through each person realizing their own song. We all have a certain vibrational field that we act within. And each person has, a person's song means their potential. And so when a person merits to sing their song, to reveal their song, that is a revelation of I will be that I will be. So this is a very, very beautiful idea. And it also applies to Moshe, that even though we think of Moshe as the lawgiver, the teacher, the leader, the Midrash says, and as a little plug for Fruits of the Orchard, I have a whole article about the 10 archetypal songs sung through history. We're told 9 of them have been sung already in the Chumash, in the Tanakh, and 1 is waiting for Mashiach. Shiru Lashem Shir Chadash. We will sing to God a new song. Moshe is involved in 5 of the 10. I'm not going to go over it right now, but the idea is it's a whole different way to look at Moshe. Moshe, of course, led us at the song at the sea. He was involved with the song at the well. He teaches the people the song of Ha'azinu. He taught Yoshua the secret of song with which Yoshua is able to stop the sun. And because the soul of Moshe will be in Mashiach, Hua Goel Rishon, Hua Goel Acharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he will be the last Redeemer. So that's the 5th song. So a full half of all of the archetypal songs have to do with Moshe. And the Midrash says that Moshe knew the secret of every creation's song. And this is manifest later in David in Perek Shira, the Midrash that assigns 70 creations from the mineral world through the animal world with particular songs. So that's our first example for tonight. The next one, for those who have 70 faces, is on page 636. And we see that the numerical value of wisdom, chachma, is 73. What is the reverse of 73? Is 37. 37 spells the word ha-lev, the heart. So here, what may appear to be a bit of a contradiction, we have the inverse of wisdom is the heart. Usually with wisdom, we think of the mind, the brain, the head. And yet its inverse is the heart. Not only is it the inverse, this does not work with every number. It's also the middle number. Every odd number has a middle point. The middle point of 73, wisdom, chachma, is halev, 37. So this is a profound idea that the Alter Rebbe was known to advocate this idea called hamoach shalit al halev, that the mind should rule over the heart. The heart represents the emotions, and we know that the emotions can be very finicky. They can be a roller coaster of feelings within a 24-hour day, actually, sometimes within a few minutes of each other. We could be riding the roller coaster from the highest peak to the lowest valley. So the mind needs to rule over the heart. But then the Alter Rebbe said, but there is an inner point of the heart that has a certain wisdom that the mind does not have. And that we should alert ourselves that at key points in our life, even though in general, the mind really does have to rule over the heart, but not to squash the heart, and not never to listen to it. That sometimes the inner point of the heart, just like 37 is the inner middle point of Chachma, 73. So this is just a beautiful idea revealed through inverse numbers. The next one, also on page 636, is that the term Eretz Yisrael equals 832. The inverse of 832 is 238. What word has the gematria of 238 is Rachel. So we'll ask, well, what is the special connection of Rachel with Eretz Yisrael? What is this connection teaching us? So first of all, we know that when they came into the land, after Yaakov had left the land for 20 years, and after he comes back to the land, Rachel dies in childbirth. And she's buried by herself in Bethlehem. And everyone asks, why didn't Yaakov take her and bury her with Avram and Sarah, Yitzhak and Rivka? And when he passes away, he gave specific directions to his sons to bury him in Hebron, along with the other patriarchs and matriarchs. So why is she by herself? So there are many answers, but one of the answers that is given is many years later, Jeremiah, reveals in a prophecy, and I'll read it in English. So says God. It's, if anyone wants to look it up later, it's the 31st chapter, verses 14 through 16 in the book of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah, speaking in God's name, says, so says God, a voice is heard on high, lamentation, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children, for they are not, meaning they are in exile. They're not in Eretz Yisrael where they're supposed to be. So says God, refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work. Here, God is speaking directly to Rachel. Refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, says God. And they shall come back from the land of the enemy, and there is hope for your future, says God, and the children shall return to their own border. So because of this prophecy of Jeremiah and connecting it to Rachel, the tradition is with divine providence. Why was she buried by herself in Bethlehem? And it's said that after the destruction of the temple, that was the route that the exiles were taken into captivity. And they had to pass by her grave, and she was crying for them. And Jeremiah is saying she's crying through all the generations, but God promises that your tears are not for vain, that your children will come back. And Reb Shlomo wrote a beautiful nigun to these words. And I'll sing it really quickly. Kol berama, berama kol nishma, rachem bebacha, bebacha abaneha, beshavu banim, beshavu banim, beshavu banim, beshavu banim, Vishavu banim lekulam. So the words are, a voice is heard in Ramah. In Ramah, that's the name of a place. In Ramah, a voice is heard. Rachel is crying for her children. And then the refrain is just the exact words from here. Vishavu banim ligvulam, that the children will return to their borders. And I remember, it's one of the songs I play on my dulcimer. I really love this song. I'm sure you all remember, it's probably at least 10 years ago now. If you remember, there were 3 teenagers who were abducted, and their fate was not known for almost a month. No one knew. They knew they were abducted because one of them was able to send a message as he was being abducted, but they didn't know where, they don't know what happened to them. And we know that in times of trouble, Am Yisrael comes together. And people were davening, everyone was lighting candles for them. There were gatherings and prayer gatherings, and at the Kotel, in the Knesset, I remember the whole Knesset had a prayer session. And the song that, in a sense, it was totally spontaneous, that kind of became the theme song of that whole month were these words, Vishavu banim ligvulam. Everyone was praying that they would be found and returned home. Unfortunately, it took a month, and they finally were able to track down that they had been killed in the first 24 hours, but no one knew. No one knew. And I remember, I'm a little bit off track here, but personal stories are good. My wife and I, we were up north. We were on vacation. We were up in the Golan Heights when it was announced that their bodies had been found. And the 3 families of these 3 teenagers lived in different places, but all near the city of Modi'in, which is right near our Moshav. And so they decided that they would bury them in Modi'in, which would be in the middle of the 3 families. And we, like I said, we were up north, but we watched it, and I can't remember. There was something like 3 or 4 or 500,000 people converged on a very small cemetery in Modi'in. And the cemetery is right off a major highway called 443. And they showed pictures that for kilometers, miles and miles and miles and miles, people parked along the highway and walked to where the funeral was happening. It was astounding. It was absolutely astounding. But all of that was to explain the power of these words from Jeremiah from 2,700 years ago, and the connection of Eretz Yisrael to Rachel. Okay, the next one is one that you probably heard from me many times, but it's such a beautiful one. It's on page 637, and that is that the numerical value of Shabbos, Shabbat, is 702. The inverse is 207, which is the gematria of light, or, and Ein Sof, the infinite. So what's the connection? So a very deep connection is to the, it's not just a minhag, but the halacha to light candles before Shabbos. And What is somewhat of a minhag, because not everyone does it, even though it's close to being universal, but women make this motion when they light the candles as if they're bringing light into Shabbos and bringing infinite light into the finite lights of the candles. So it's a very, very beautiful secret of lighting the candles before Shabbos, is because the mirror image of Shabbat is light. And that's why we bring Shabbos in light. And then in the Havdalah ceremony, we also usher Shabbat out in light. And that we see in the inverse numbers. Now, the next one I'm mentioning because it's soon upon us, and that is the month of Tishrei. If you look at the spelling of the month of Tishrei, it's from the first three letters of Tishrei are the last three letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but backwards. Tav, Shin, Resh, and then a Yud. Tishrei. So here, instead, usually you think of the Aleph Bet as you start from the beginning. Here, Tishrei is going, as it were, from the back inverse towards the Aleph. And a simple understanding of this is that we know that there are two New Year, there are actually 4 New Years in the Jewish year. But as far as time, the New Year of years is Rosh Hashanah. But the Torah mentions over and over again, it's in the 7th month. It's not in the 1st month. And from this, we learn that there is another Rosh Hashanah, another New Year of months, and that is Nisan. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, they're both New Years. And so we're told that the energy of Nisan is God is coming to redeem us. And especially on Seder night, the moon is full, and you can feel the light coming from above to below. It's redemptive power, redemptive energy. Tishrei, in a sense, the whole emphasis is on tshuva. And tshuva is coming from below to above. So in this way, we can relate, if we follow the Aleph Bet from the Aleph to the Tav, it's direct light. But if you start from the other side, it's going backwards, represents what's called returning light, or in this case, the light of tshuva. Now, the other place that we have this, where the letters are reversed, but here not just 3 letters, like in Tishrei, but in Musaf of Shabbat, in the additional prayer of Shabbat, after the first initial 3 blessings that we make with every time we daven the Amidah, the silent prayer, the first 22 words in the middle section of Musaf begins from the Tav and goes all the way to the Aleph. It's all in reverse. And this is really, in a sense, the secret of Musaf. Musaf means an additional prayer. So again, Shabbat, God initiated Shabbat. We observe Shabbat, but Shabbat goes back to creation. And so the energy of Shabbat is from above to below. But on Shabbat, our prayers, our praise of God on Shabbat, our observance, and here especially the Musaf prayer, is our, in a sense, gift back, our praise back So it begins in verse. It begins, but here, like I said, it's not just Tav Shin Reish of Tishrei, but it goes through all 22 letters as an acronym backwards. The next one also has to do with Rosh Hashanah. That's why I chose it on page 638. And that is the connection between the name of God, Elohim, which is 86. What is the reverse of 86? 68. What is 68? Chaim, life. Chai is 18, but the plural, l'chaim, chaim tovim, is 68. So Elohim, the name Elohim is always associated with judgment, the aspect of judgment. And what are we praying for? Bottom line on Rosh Hashanah, as we say in Unatana Tokef, who will live and who will die? We're praying for life, and that's why we insert during the 10 days of Tshuva, Zachrenu l'chaim, Melech chafetz b'chaim, v'kadvenu b'sefer chaim, l'mancha Elokim chaim. Not Yud-Kei Vav-Kei chaim, Elokim, because they're in verse. So just to translate, Zachrenu l'chaim, remember us for life. Melech chafetz b'chaim, the king who desires life. V'kadvenu b'sefer chaim, and write us in the book of life, for the sake, l'mancha Elokim chaim, for the sake of the living God. So here we see that the inverse of the name Elokim in judgment is our prayer for Chaim, for Chaim. Okay, I think we'll stop at that one. And the last one we'll do is a very important one because we recite it every day. It's in the Shema. In the verse of the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Here, Israel, God, our God, God is one. There are two large letters. It's the only verse in the entire Tanakh that has two large letters, the Ayin of Shema and the Daled of Echad. They're written big in the Torah. So when you read them, the way we read Hebrew, the Ayin Daled spells Ad. Aid. Aid means witness. So this teaches us, what are we doing when we say the Shema? Ultimately, God has appointed us as witnesses of monotheism, that God is one. But if you take this, the Ayin and the Daled and you inverse them, they spell Daled Ayin spells Da, to know. So this is a very important complementary idea, because when we think of Shema, we think of it as the cardinal statement of faith in Judaism. And yet, encoded in the Shema in big letters is the idea of not just being witnesses, but you can't be a witness if you haven't seen something. You can't be a true witness if you don't know what you are testifying is true. So here we have this beautiful combination of faith and knowledge. And many times we talk about the idea of blind faith, but the Shema is teaching us something different, that the faith that we are learning about in the Shema is a type of faith that's based on everything we not just believe to be true, but in our mind, in our heart, in our guts, we know is true. So here you have this beautiful unity between faith and knowing. And this is shown in a beautiful, what's called a notricon, where you take a word and each letter of the word begins a word itself. So this is a teaching from Rav Ginsburg that the word Adam, a human being, the Aleph stands for Emunah. The Daled of Adam stands for Dat. And the Mem stands for Maaseh. I'll go back. Emunah means faith, the Aleph. The Daled is Dat, which means knowledge. And the Mem is Maaseh, which means action. So Rav Ginsburg says this sums up the essence of our service in the world, our consciousness in the world, is that our faith should be based on knowledge, and then the faith and knowledge should be put into action. So it's a very simple but very, very profound teaching. Okay, now we're going to chapter 67, and this is called the average value of letters and words. And this is definitely a methodology that Rav Ginsburg has very, very much revealed the importance of. So I'll explain it like this. Well, we'll just go to our first example on page 641. And we see that the two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so their numerical value is a relationship of 1 to 4. The term Eitz HaChaim equals 233. And the term Eitz Hadat Tov Ra equals 932. So 932 is exactly 4 times 233. So there is a relationship between 1 and 4. And I believe just 2 or 3 weeks ago, in the chapter about relationships between numbers, we did a long explanation of the importance of the ratio of 1 to 4. Here, we're only going to concentrate on the connection between these two terms, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what we can learn from this, so first of all, Eitz Hadat Tov Vara is 4 words. And so here's where this method comes in. So if you have 4 words and they equal 932, so what's the average of each of the words? Well, here, because there are 4 words, you divide by 4, and you get 233, which is the tree of life. So what is this teaching us? It's an amazing thing. In other words, the average of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the tree of life. So we can learn 2 things from this. One is the tradition that had Adam and Eve waited until Shabbat, they could have eaten both from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. But the important thing was the reason that God made it forbidden was by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil before the tree of life. That is what the problem was. In other words, they weren't grounded. They didn't have the right context. had they eaten from the tree of life first, and we know that the tree of life is a code word for the Torah itself. When we put the Torah away after reading it publicly, we say, Eitz Chaim hi, lamacha zikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life for those who grasp onto it. So here we see that even though we think of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge as being totally opposite, totally like mutually exclusive, but it's not really true. And we see it more from just even the description. When the Torah describes these two trees, all it mentions that they were both in the middle of the garden. And so the Zohar brings down the idea that it's not that they were both just in the middle of the garden. They shared the same roots. They shared the same roots. So if we go back to what we just learned about Adam, the Aleph, the Dalet, and the Mem of faith, knowledge, here's the tree of knowledge and action. So ultimately, we are meant to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But since we did it in a wrong manner, in a forbidden manner, and it was forbidden because God knew first they'll eat from the tree of life, and then they'll be prepared, they'll have the right background, the right context to be able to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it would be a positive thing. And this we all see in not only the 1-to-4 ratio between these two trees, but the fact that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the 4 words, the average of each word is the tree of life, 233. So that's our first example. Now the next one is on page 643, and that is the phrase which is repeated in the Torah, Pesach hu Lashem. The holiday of Pesach is to God. So that phrase equals Gevura, 216. Pesach hu Lashem is Gevura. And like we said just a few minutes ago, the energy of Pesach, of Nisan, is redemption. The light is coming from above. The miracles, the redemption is coming from above. And that's what it means. Pesach hu Lashem. God is making it all happen. And it equals Gevura, because all of the plagues were a manifestation, a revelation of God's strength and Gevura and judgment. Now, the amazing thing is, again, this is revealed by Rav Ginsburg. So there's 3 words in this phrase, Pesach hu Lashem. So what is the average? So you just take 3 words and divide it into 216. You come out with 72, which is chesed, which is, whoa, that's the opposite of Gevura. It's not the opposite. It's the complementary. The greatest chesed that God did for us was to take us out of Egypt. It came through Gevura, but it was God's chesed. And the place that we see this even fuller is, and this many months ago, it was one of the things that we learned. And that is that as we're about to cross the Red Sea, we're surrounded by the sea and Pharaoh's approaching army. And there are 3 verses in a row that have 72 letters. And these verses basically are just saying that, explaining how God divided with a pillar of fire between the approaching Egyptians and Israel as they were facing the sea. There's 3 verses in Parshat B'Shalach. And from this, there's a tradition that goes back thousands of years that encoded in these 3 sentences of 72 letters are 72 names of God. And what I'm pointing out is if you multiply, like we just did, but now in inverse order, here we took Gevura Pesach, Hu Lashem equals Gevura, equals 216, but there are 3 words. So the average of each word is 72 is Chesed. Here in these 3 verses that have 72 letters, so if you multiply 3 times 72, you get Gevura. The same thing, but in inverse level. So here again, you have this complementary union of Gevura and Chesed. And it's through the average of these 3 words that we're learning. Pesach, Hu, Lashem. So that's just a very, very beautiful thing. And we know that we're about, actually here in Israel, right now, I would be at Mincha of Erev Rosh Hashanah next week. So at the very, very, very end of the 10 days of Tshuva, at the end of Ne'ilah, so everyone with renewed vigor yells out Shema Yisrael 1 time, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed 3 times, and then Hashem Hu HaElokim 7 times. And everyone in every congregation I've ever been in, like, is yelling at the top of their lungs, right? Hashem Hu HaElokim. But that's the secret that we're learning here today. The union of Gevura and Chesed is what it means. Hashem, which is identified with compassion and Chesed. Hu HaElokim. That is what Elokim is. Even though it appears on the outside that Elokim is judgment and strength and power, but they're totally complementary. Okay, the next one is one second. Okay, it's the last one on 643. This is also a very, very beautiful one. When the spies come back, the 12 spies come back, and we know the tragic story of 10 of them give a very, very negative report and say we can't go into the land. We can't go into the land. And 2 of them, Yoshua and Caleb, say, no, God promised to bring us in. Of course we can go in. And so after the spies had a lot to say, so Caleb says, Tova ha'oretz me'od ma'od. The land is very, very good. And we can do it. We can do it. So that phrase, Tova ha'oretz ma'od ma'od, equals 408. But again, Rav Ginsburg points out, well, what's call it the common denominator? What's the average of these 4 words? What's connecting them? So if you take 408 and divide by 4, because there are 4 words, you get 102. 102 equals emunah, faith. So this is what the two spies, there were spies in Caleb and Yoshua were saying, where is everyone's emunah? God promised us that not only is it a good land, but he's giving us the land. And we just have to have faith. Tovah ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. It's a land of faith. And this is so true today. And it's been true for, first of all, for 2,000 years, because we didn't lose our faith that we would eventually come back. That is why we came back. Because we never gave up that faith. It's a land of faith, but not only a land of faith, but we had faith that we would be brought back to the land. And from the time that we began coming back in recent history, so we all know how many wars have been fought, how much mesirut nefesh it's taken to create a state of Israel today. And even today, even though unfortunately it's true, Israel has become very strong, but when you look at the bigger picture, and we hope that it's changing, certainly in the last 2 years since the Abraham Accords, there has been a watershed of change. But if you look at a map of the Arab and Muslim world, from Morocco to Indonesia, well, Israel is this tiny speck on the map. And even though it appears in all the papers that we're now the Goliath and our enemies are the David, that is not the real truth. We are still like surrounded in a sea of people who do not want us here. So it takes tremendous faith of the Jewish people day to day to make it here, day to day. And yet we go about our lives, and I'm sure you've read that every year they do this, I don't know what it's called, the happiness survey among nations. Israel is always in the top 10 happiest people in the world. We're like one of the only countries whose very existence is called into question from the day of its inception. And like I said, there have been, I think, 4 wars between Israel and the Gaza Strip in the last 20 years, not counting the 48 war and the 56 war and the 67 war and the 73 war and the Lebanese war, War I, Lebanese War II, and 3 actually. And yet, Tovah ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. It's a very, very good land, very good land. Okay, now I'm going to just put these together because we talked about Chaim before. This is on page 644. We talked about life, Chaim. And so Chaim, now here we're not doing words, we're doing letters. How many letters are there in the word Chaim? 4. Chet, Yud, Yud, Mem. 4 letters. So what's the average of each letter of Chaim? It's Tov, meaning 17 is Tov. 17 times 4 is 68. So here we have the phrase L'chaim tovim, a good life. Chaim tovim. So here we're connecting the Tov of Tovah ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. It's a very good, very, very good land. And what we learned before about Chaim. And so with Rosh Hashanah coming, and we'll make this our last example, because it leads right into a bracha that we're all praying, not just for Chaim, we're praying for Chaim Tovim, a good life, a revealed good. Like Nachumish Gamzu said, Gam zu latova. This is also for the good. The simple understanding is the Gam is also something that appears to be negative. It also will ultimately be revealed as being good. And so many, many different teachings are that we appeal to God. We don't want to just say Gam zu latova. We want the good to be revealed now. So in essence, we'll all be davening for that. We'll all be davening for not just hidden good that we have to go through all kinds of trials and tribulations to get to the goodness, but rather a kind of good that's revealed and immediately felt. So all of us, we will not be meeting again until after Rosh Hashanah. I mentioned before is we do not have a class next week because it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. And the last 3 chapters will be between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Sunday between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I just want to bless everyone with a Shana Tova U'Metuka, a sweet year. Everyone should be written in the book of life and sealed in the book of life. And the deepest longings of our heart should be fulfilled.